The sun was setting behind the wide golden fields. The sky turned red and orange, and the shadows grew longer on the farmer's land. His farm was quiet, only the sound of wind moving through the crops. For years he had lived here alone, working hard from morning until night. It was a lonely life, but it was honest. He grew food not just for himself, but also for the small human colony nearby. But lately, something was wrong. At first, he thought it was nothing. A few missing ears of corn, a strange noise in the middle of the night, or crops that looked as if someone had bitten into them. He thought it might be wild animals. Maybe some small scavengers that had escaped into the colony fields. But the strange marks kept appearing. One morning he found tiny footprints near the edge of the field. They were not the prints of a rabbit or a bird or any animal he knew. They were too small, too thin, too strange. The marks looked almost like the footprints of a child, but even smaller, and there were many of them. The farmer crouched down, touched the soil, and frowned. "Who's been walking here?" he whispered. His voice was calm, but inside he felt a chill. That night the sounds grew louder. He woke up to faint squeaks, like whispers carried by the wind. He listened carefully, holding his breath. The sound came from the field, soft and quick, then fading into silence. When he stepped outside, the wind was cold and the night sky was full of stars. The crops stood tall, waving slightly, but nothing moved. No intruders. Still, he knew he wasn't imagining it. The next day, he searched the rows of crops again. That was when he noticed something even stranger. Half-eaten vegetables left behind, but the bites were tiny, too small for any normal animal. Not only that, the food seemed carefully chosen. The sweetest corn, the ripest fruit, the tender roots. Whoever or whatever was sneaking in. It was clever. The farmer scratched his beard and narrowed his eyes. He wasn't afraid, but he was curious. Something was out there, hiding in the shadows of his land. Something hungry. For the next few nights he tried to catch the thief. He left the lantern burning outside his door. He placed tools nearby, ready to scare away any creature that came too close. But nothing showed itself. Only the same soft noises, the same strange marks in the soil. The mystery grew deeper. One evening, while fixing his fences, the farmer noticed a glimmer under the moonlight. Something small darted between the stalks. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw it again. A flash of movement fast and low to the ground. He froze, staring into the darkness. His heart beat faster. "Come out," he whispered. But whatever it was, it vanished. The corn rustled and then silence. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat near the window with a cup of water in his hand, watching the fields. The stars shone brightly above, but his eyes kept searching the ground below. Hours passed. Midnight came. The farm seemed empty. And then he heard it again, the squeaking. This time closer. It was almost like voices. Tiny, high-pitched voices talking in whispers. He leaned forward, pressing his ear to the glass. His hands grew tight around the cup. The voices were soft, almost too soft to understand, but they were not the sound of animals. They were words, but whose words? The farmer stood up and opened his door slowly, careful not to make a sound. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. He stepped outside into the cool night air and followed the whispers. His lantern swung in his hand, throwing shadows across the tall crops. And then he saw them. For just a moment at the edge of the field, he caught sight of small figures. Too small to be human. They stood in a cluster, glowing faintly under the starlight. Their bodies were thin, their heads large, their eyes wide and shining like glass beads. They looked up at him, frozen in fear. Before he could move, before he could even breathe, they scattered, darting into the crops faster than rabbits. The stalk shook and bent, and then the field was quiet again. The farmer stood alone, his lantern flickering, his heart racing. He knew now that his farm was not being raided by animals. The truth was far stranger. Something was living out there in the shadows of his land. Something small, something desperate, and something not of this world. And for the first time in many years, the farmer felt a shiver of both fear and wonder. The farmer could not forget what he had seen that night. Those tiny figures, those shining eyes, the way they vanished into the crops as if the earth itself had swallowed them. All day he worked on the farm, but his mind was far away. His hands moved, pulling weeds and repairing tools, but his thoughts circled back to that moment. Were they real? Or had he dreamed it? No, he told himself. It was real. Too real. When the sun went down again, the farm grew quiet. The farmer sat inside, staring at the door. His lantern was ready. His boots were by his side. His old hunting stick leaned against the wall. He wasn't planning to hurt them, but he wanted answers. That night he would not let them escape. The hours dragged by. Midnight came. Then silence. The kind of silence where every sound feels louder than it is. The farmer stepped outside. The moonlight spilled silver across the field. He moved slowly, his boots soft against the soil. The air was cold, carrying the smell of earth and crops, and then he heard it. A rustle. He held his breath. His eyes followed the movement, stalks bending, leaves shaking. Something was out there, not one, but many. The farmer tightened his grip on the lantern. He moved closer, careful with every step. His heart beat like a drum. At the edge of the corn row, he stopped. He lifted the lantern high and light spread over the field. What he saw made him gasp. Tiny figures, no taller than his knees, stood frozen in the glow. Their skin was pale and faintly glowing like the inside of a seashell. Their heads were large compared to their bodies, and their eyes, huge, black and glistening, stared at him with fear. Their limbs were thin, trembling as they clutched pieces of his corn in their hands. For a long moment no one moved. The farmer and the strange visitors simply stared at each other, locked in silence. Then one of them squeaked. A sound like a frightened bird. Instantly the others panicked. They tried to scatter, darting into the shadows. But the farmer, acting quickly, stepped in front of them. "Wait," he said, his voice firm but not angry. He held up his free hand, showing he meant no harm. The little creatures stopped. They huddled together, shivering, their round eyes glimmering in the lantern light. One of them dropped the corn cob it had stolen. It rolled across the soil and stopped near the farmer's boot. He looked down at it, then back at them. They weren't dangerous. They weren't thieves. They were hungry. The farmer could see it in their thin arms, their weak legs. Their bones pressed against their glowing skin. Their movements were slow, tired, desperate. They weren't raiding his farm for greed. They were raiding it to survive. His chest tightened. He remembered his own childhood during the famine years on Earth, when food was scarce and every meal mattered. He remembered the hollow feeling of hunger, the helplessness of watching his family suffer. These creatures, whoever they were living that same nightmare. The farmer slowly crouched down, lowering himself so he didn't tower above them. His lantern swung gently, shadows stretching across their faces. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're not in trouble." Of course, they didn't understand his words. But his tone, his calm voice seemed to ease their fear, if only a little. One of the small aliens stepped forward. Its body shook with weakness, but its eyes stayed on him. It raised the half-eaten corn cob it carried as if offering it back to him. The farmer blinked. He hadn't expected that. He looked at the tiny alien for a moment, then slowly shook his head. He pushed the cob gently back toward the creature's hands. "Keep it," he whispered. The alien tilted its head, confused. Its thin fingers clutched the corn tightly, almost protectively. Then, to the farmer's surprise, it took a cautious bite. The others watched, wide-eyed. When nothing bad happened, they too began nibbling on what little they had. Their movements were desperate but careful, like children trying not to anger a parent. The farmer stayed crouched, just watching. He realized they weren't invaders. They weren't enemies. They were starving, and for the first time he wondered, how long have they been living like this? The creatures finished eating. They looked at him again, nervous but no longer trying to flee. Their squeaks grew softer, almost like whispers. They touched each other's arms, pointing at him, as if trying to decide what he was. "Friend or foe?" the farmer sighed. He pulled out the small cloth bag he carried, the one filled with bread he had baked earlier. Slowly he opened it, took a piece, and placed it on the ground in front of them. The aliens stared at the bread. None of them moved, so he tore off a piece, put it in his own mouth, and chewed. Then he set the rest back down and stepped away. Finally, one of the smaller ones crept forward. It touched the bread, sniffed it, and took the tiniest bite. Its black eyes widened. It let out a sound, half squeak, half sigh. Then it ate more quickly, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. The others rushed forward, sharing the bread, their voices rising with excitement. The farmer watched them, a strange feeling growing in his chest. He had given them food and they had accepted it. And in that moment, under the cold starlight, he realized something important. These weren't just strange visitors. They were living beings. They were hungry, fragile, and scared. and now they trusted him. The next morning, the farmer woke with heavy eyes. He had not slept much. The image of the little creatures eating his bread stayed in his mind. Their thin arms, their glowing skin, their wide black eyes. He could still see them clearly. He sat at his wooden table, staring at his hands. His calloused palms told the story of years of hard work, of soil turned, of harvest collected. His life had always been simple: plant, water, grow, reap. But now, his world no longer felt simple. Those little aliens had changed everything. Hunger in the fields. When the farmer stepped outside, the sun was rising, painting the fields in gold. His crop stood tall, healthy, and full. There was more than enough food for him, and even enough to sell to the colony. But as he walked among the rows, he noticed movement again. Not bold, not loud, just quiet rustles here and there. He knew what it was. They were still hiding, watching him. He crouched near the corn and whispered, "You're hungry, aren't you?" No answer came, of course. Only silence. But he could feel their eyes on him. A memory of famine. As he worked through the morning, his mind drifted back to his childhood. He remembered the famine years on Earth, when entire towns struggled to survive. He remembered his mother dividing one loaf of bread among 5 mouths, her own lips dry as she pretended she wasn't hungry. He remembered neighbors turning cruel, stealing from each other, fighting over scraps. Hunger changed people. Hunger destroyed trust, and yet sometimes hunger brought people together. He remembered one old man from his village who shared his potatoes with everyone, even when he had little himself. That man had been mocked at first, but later, people said he was the only reason some families survived. The farmer clenched his jaw. Now it was his turn to make a choice. The visitors' return. That night he didn't wait inside. He carried a small basket of food and set it on the ground near the field's edge. Then he stepped back and waited. At first there was nothing. The air was still, the stars bright. He wondered if they had gone, but then the squeaks returned. Soft, cautious, tiny figures emerged from the shadows. They moved slowly, nervously, their heads turning in every direction. When they saw the basket, they froze. The farmer raised his hand, palm open, and stepped back farther. He wanted them to know the food was safe. One of the braver aliens, the same small one from last night, crept forward. It sniffed at the bread and fruit inside the basket. Then with trembling hands, it lifted a piece and took a bite. The others squeaked with excitement and rushed forward. Soon the basket was surrounded by glowing little bodies, all eating, all chattering in their strange, high voices. The farmer watched, his heart heavy and warm at the same time, fear and doubt. But even as he watched them eat, doubt whispered in his mind. What if they tell others? What if more come? What if they drain my farm dry? He shook his head. They were small, weak, and starving. They were no army. They were survivors. Still, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. If he shared too much, would he put himself at risk? If he shared nothing, would he let them die? He gripped the handle of the lantern, feeling the rough wood bite into his palm. The choice made. The aliens finished their meal. Slowly, one by one, they looked up at him. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lantern's light. The farmer knelt down so he wasn't towering over them. His knees pressed into the soil. He pointed to the basket, then to himself, then back to them. He repeated the motion, making it clear. I will give, you may take. The little ones tilted their heads. Then to his surprise, several of them placed the empty fruit rinds back into the basket as if showing respect. The farmer felt something shift inside him. They weren't just taking. They were thanking. His choice was clear now. He would help them. A silent promise. The farmer stood, lifting the empty basket. He gave one last nod toward the creatures before walking back to his house. Behind him, the field was alive with whispers and soft squeaks. As he placed the basket on his table, he felt strangely lighter. Tired, yes. Unsure, yes. But lighter. He had made his decision. Tomorrow he would bring more. For now, the creatures had food. For now they would live another day. And deep inside, though he would never admit it aloud, the farmer felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. The farmer's routine began to change. For years, his days had been simple. Wake at dawn, tend the fields, repair tools, eat alone, and sleep early. But now every evening carried a new purpose. He no longer watched the sunset with quiet indifference. Instead, he waited for nightfall with a strange mixture of nerves and curiosity, because he knew when the stars rose, his strange visitors would return. A silent ritual at dusk, the farmer began placing food in the same spot near the field's edge. Sometimes it was bread, sometimes ripe fruit, sometimes roasted vegetables he had saved from his dinner. At first, the aliens came cautiously, moving like shadows between the stalks, but over time their fear softened. They crept closer, their glowing bodies shimmering faintly under the lantern light. The farmer never spoke much. He didn't want to scare them, but he made sure to smile, to move slowly, to show that he meant no harm. It became a ritual. He left food. They came, they ate. He watched, and in that quiet exchange, a bond began to form. First signs of trust one evening, something new happened. Instead of darting back into the field after eating, one of the aliens lingered. The smallest one, the same brave creature who had first accepted his bread, took a hesitant step toward him. Its wide black eyes blinked, reflecting the lantern's glow. The farmer knelt down, holding very still. The tiny alien squeaked softly, tilting its head as if studying him. Then, to the farmer's surprise, it touched the ground with its thin fingers and began to draw in the soil. The lines were simple, uneven, but the farmer recognized the shape. A circle with smaller circles inside. A planet. The creature pointed to itself, then to the drawing, then lowered its head with a faint squeak. The farmer frowned. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the sadness. This was not their home. The language of gestures. Night after night, the farmer and the aliens began using the soil as their language. The farmer drew stick figures of himself planting seeds, watering them, harvesting food. The aliens would squeak in excitement and draw small figures holding out empty hands. The farmer realized they were trying to say, "We are hungry, we need help." He responded by drawing himself, handing food to them. Their squeaks grew louder, almost joyful. They understood. No words were shared, but meaning passed between them. Slowly, the wall of fear began to fall. The hidden village one night, after sharing food, the small alien motioned for the farmer to follow. It darted between the crops, looking back to make sure he was coming. The farmer hesitated, then lit his lantern and walked carefully behind. His boots crunched softly against the soil. The night was silent except for the whisper of the wind and the faint squeaks ahead. Finally, they reached the edge of a shallow pit near the woods. The farmer held the lantern high and gasped. Down below, hidden from sight, was a cluster of tiny shelters made of sticks, leaves, and scraps of metal. Dozens of glowing figures huddled together, their bodies thin and weak. Some lay on the ground, too tired to stand. Children, smaller than the rest, clung to their parents with wide, hollow eyes. The farmer's throat tightened. He hadn't realized how many of them there were. They weren't just visitors. They were a community, a village of survivors, and they were starving. A decision in the dark. The farmer stood there for a long moment, staring at the fragile homes, the trembling bodies, the faint glow of the creature's skin. He felt a weight pressing on his chest. He could turn away, pretend he had never seen this, keep his harvest for himself and let them vanish quietly into the night. But as he looked at the children, he remembered his own childhood hunger. He remembered nights of going to bed with an empty stomach, wishing for just one bite of food. No, he couldn't walk away. That night, he left more than usual at the field's edge. Baskets of corn, potatoes, a jug of fresh water. The squeaks that rose from the pit were softer this time. Not desperate, not fearful, grateful. The farmer's secret days turned into weeks. The farmer continued his silent work by day, but his true purpose came at night. He fed them, taught them gestures, and even began leaving tools for them to use. When other colonists visited his farm, he said nothing. He guarded his secret fiercely. The world wasn't ready to know about these creatures. But every night, when he saw their glowing eyes shine brighter, when he heard the children's squeaks turn playful instead of weak, he knew he had made the right choice. The secret friendship between one human farmer and a village of starving aliens grew in silence, hidden beneath the stars. And though no one else knew it, history was quietly being written in those fields. The farmer had grown used to his new life. Each evening, when the sun slipped behind the hills, he carried food to the field's edge, and each night the small glowing creatures came to meet him. At first they had been weak and frightened, but now their steps were quicker, their eyes brighter. He had expected nothing in return. For him it was enough to know they were alive, that they no longer trembled with hunger. But one night, as he placed down the basket, something unexpected happened. A strange offering. The smallest alien, the one who had always been braver than the rest, stepped forward. But instead of taking food, it carried something in its thin arms. The farmer narrowed his eyes. It looked like a stone, no bigger than his fist. But as the alien came closer, the stone glowed softly, humming like a living thing. The creature placed it carefully at the farmer's feet, then squeaked a sound that was different from hunger. It was a gift. The farmer bent down and lifted the object. At once, a strange warmth ran through his fingers. The stone vibrated faintly like it carried a heartbeat. Its glow shifted, colors rippling across the surface. And what in the world? The farmer whispered. The crystal's power back inside his house. He set the stone on the table. He lit a lantern and leaned closer. The surface of the object was smooth, almost glass-like, yet alive. He could see faint lines inside it, patterns like flowing rivers of light. Curious, he reached for his broken spade that lay in the corner. The wooden handle had snapped days ago and he hadn't yet repaired it. He touched the crystal to the tool and froze. Before his eyes, the crack in the wood sealed itself. The handle grew whole again, the tool as good as new. The farmer staggered back, heart pounding. "Impossible," he muttered. He touched the crystal again, this time to his lantern, which had a bent frame. The metal straightened, smooth and strong as if it had never been damaged. The crystal pulsed in his palm, its light glowing brighter, as though it were proud of its work. Fear and wonder. The farmer's mind spun. Was this alien technology? Magic, some kind of living stone? He remembered the small alien's face when it gave him the crystal. Its wide black eyes had not shown fear, only trust. They had given him something precious, something powerful. But why? He stared at the glowing object, torn between awe and worry. If others discovered this, they would come running. Scientists, soldiers, colonists. They would not see a gift. They would see a weapon, a tool, a treasure. The farmer clenched his fist around the crystal. He couldn't let anyone know. Not yet. A silent message. The next night he brought the crystal with him to the field. When the aliens appeared, he held it up, letting its glow mix with the starlight. The creatures squeaked in excitement, their voices rising together. They pointed at the crystal, then at him. The small alien drew quickly in the soil. Circles, stars, a large shape breaking apart, then small figures running. Finally, it pointed to the crystal again. The farmer understood. This was not just a gift. This was a piece of their home. Something from the world they had lost. He felt his chest tighten. They had trusted him with a fragment of their past. The farmer's dilemma back in his home, the farmer lay awake, the crystal glowing softly beside his bed. He thought of what this meant. With this power, he could repair anything. He could sell it, become rich, maybe even change the colony forever. But at what cost? The colonists would never leave the aliens in peace. They would hunt them down, demand more crystals, maybe even destroy them. The farmer turned his face to the window, where the stars shone cold and distant. No, the gift was not for profit. It was a bond, a message of trust. He would keep their secret safe, a bond sealed. The following days passed with a new rhythm. The farmer continued to bring food and the aliens continued to grow stronger. But now each night they also brought him something small, strange seeds, fragments of glowing shells, tiny carvings made from crystal dust. They were giving him pieces of their world, little tokens of gratitude. The farmer accepted each one with quiet respect. In return, he began to share more of himself. He showed them how to plant seeds, how to dig irrigation lines, how to store food in clay pots. They watched with wide eyes, copying his movements with clumsy but eager hands. And slowly, they were no longer just survivors. They were students. The shocking realization one evening, as the farmer sat by his fire, the crystal resting on the table beside him, he realized something that made his heart race. This friendship was no longer simple. It was no longer about food or survival. The aliens had given him a gift that could change everything, his farm, the colony, perhaps even the entire human race, and in doing so, they had tied their future to his. He stared at the pulsing crystal, the faint hum filling the quiet night. Whatever path lay ahead, he knew one truth: his life would never be ordinary again. The crystal sat on the farmer's table like a silent heart, glowing faintly in the dark. Every night he stared at it before sleeping, and every morning he found himself checking if it was still there, still alive with its soft pulse of light. The more time passed, the more he wondered, why give me this? Why me of all people? The aliens trusted him, but trust alone did not explain the truth behind their suffering. He needed to know who they were, where they had come from, and why they had chosen him. The silent request one evening, after the farmer shared food with the small group, the brave little alien stepped forward again. Its glowing body trembled, but its wide black eyes locked onto his with determination. It squeaked a string of sounds, then pointed to the crystal, then to the stars. The farmer frowned. "The stars?" he whispered. The alien nodded, or at least tilted its head in a way that seemed like a nod. Then it drew quickly in the soil, a circle with jagged lines breaking it apart, smaller shapes falling away, figures running. The farmer's stomach tightened. He had seen drawings like this before. They were not art, they were stories. This was their story, the tale in the soil for the next hour under the pale moonlight. The aliens drew and gestured while the farmer watched in silence. They drew their home, an entire world glowing with rivers and mountains. Then they scratched jagged lines across it, showing fire, destruction, and smoke. The farmer leaned forward, trying to understand. The small alien squeaked again, pointing at the drawing. Then it showed tiny figures scattering in every direction, hiding beneath jagged lines that looked like caves. They had fled. They had hidden. The farmer's heart sank as he watched. He realized their planet had been destroyed by war. Not nature, not accident, war. The little alien added one final detail. It drew tall figures with sharp shapes in their hands, enemies. And beside them it drew small glowing figures, themselves falling to the ground. The farmer felt his throat tighten. These creatures had not just lost their home. They had been hunted. A bond of sorrow. The farmer pressed his hand to the soil, wiping away the drawing gently. He looked at the aliens, their wide eyes shimmering with pain. He didn't need to hear their words to understand. They had carried this grief for a long time, and now, for reasons he could not fully explain, they had chosen him to carry it too. He sat back on his heels and whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were soft, almost lost to the night. But the way the aliens squeaked in reply, the way their voices lowered into a mournful hum, he thought they understood. The farmer's decision, back at his home, the farmer could not sleep. His mind played the images over and over again. A broken planet, a hunted people, a hidden village clinging to survival. For weeks he had thought of them as visitors, as strange intruders on his farm. But now he understood. They were refugees, exiles of a lost world, and somehow they had ended up here, on his land. He stared at the crystal again, its light reflecting in his tired eyes. It wasn't just a gift. It was proof of who they were, proof of what they had lost. The farmer clenched his fists. These creatures had no one else. The colony would never accept them. The government would use them. The soldiers would cage them. If their story was to survive, if their children were to have a chance, then the burden rested on his shoulders. A village restored. The next nights were different. The farmer no longer only brought food. He brought tools, clay jars of water, blankets sewn from spare cloth. He taught the small aliens how to plant seeds properly in fertile soil. He dug channels to bring water into their pit. Slowly, the hidden village began to change. Children squeaked with laughter instead of hunger. Adults worked together to shape sturdier shelters. The faint glow of their bodies grew brighter each night. And always, when the farmer returned home, the crystal pulsed with stronger light, as if feeding on their hope. The shocking realization one evening, the farmer sat on a log near the pit, lantern by his side. The small alien approached again, placing its tiny hand against his boot. It squeaked softly, then pointed to him, then to the village, then touched its chest. The farmer tilted his head, not understanding at first, but then slowly the truth settled over him. They were not only thanking him, they were naming him not as a stranger, not as a farmer, but as part of them. For the first time since their world was destroyed, these aliens had chosen someone new to call their own, and that someone was him. The farmer sat very still, lantern flickering against the dark. He felt the weight of the moment press deep into his chest. This was no longer about food, no longer about kindness. He was no longer simply helping them survive. He had become their protector. And in that quiet moment, beneath the endless stars, he realized the future of an entire people now rested in his hands. The seasons turned. The farmer's land changed with them. Where once his fields had been quiet and lonely, now they were alive with whispers, laughter, and the faint glow of tiny bodies moving through the crops. The aliens were no longer weak shadows hiding in the dark. They had become a living, breathing community. Their shelters grew sturdier, their children played freely, and their eyes shone brighter with each passing day. And at the center of it all was the farmer, the man they now looked to not only as a giver of food, but as something greater, a symbol of hope every evening. The farmer still walked with his lantern and his basket of harvest, but he was no longer met with fearful eyes. Now he was greeted with squeaks of joy, tiny hands reaching out and children running to follow his steps. They had begun to call him something, short, high-pitched sounds that repeated every time he appeared. He did not know the meaning, but he knew it was their name for him. A title. When he pointed to himself and asked, "Me?" They squeaked louder, nodding eagerly. The farmer smiled. Whatever the word meant, it was spoken with love. The shrine in the field one morning, the farmer discovered something new near the edge of his land. The aliens had built a small shrine from stones and glowing crystal dust. At its center was a carved figure, rough, uneven, but clear enough to see. It was him, a tall figure holding a basket, with small glowing shapes gathered around him. The farmer stood in silence, staring at the crude statue. His throat tightened. He had never asked for thanks. He had never wanted honor. But here it was, proof that to them, he was more than a farmer. He was the giver, the protector. Whispers in the colony, of course. Secrets never stay hidden forever. Other colonists had begun to notice strange lights near his land at night. They spoke in hushed tones at the trading post, wondering if spirits haunted the farmer's fields, or if he had discovered something valuable. One man even asked him directly, "What's glowing out there at night, old friend?" The farmer only shrugged. "Fireflies," he said. "Plenty this season." But in his heart he knew the truth was fragile. If word spread, if the colony learned of the aliens and their crystal gifts, everything would collapse. The government would arrive. The soldiers would come. His friends would turn greedy. He could not let that happen. A legacy sealed in silence. So the farmer worked harder than ever to protect the secret. He built fences, claiming they were to keep animals out. He harvested at strange hours so no one saw the aliens helping him carry food. He lied when he had to, smiled when people asked questions, and lived with the heavy burden of silence. But in the quiet of night, when he saw the aliens glowing with health and joy, he knew the burden was worth it. The festival of light one evening, when the harvest was richest, the aliens surprised him. Instead of waiting at the field's edge, they filled the pit with dozens of tiny glowing crystals. They lined them up in patterns like stars brought down to earth. The entire village glowed, brighter than the moon. The aliens squeaked and danced, offering him food they had grown with the seeds he had given them. Small fruits, strange but sweet. It was their way of saying, "We no longer only take. We can give too." The farmer sat among them, eating their strange fruit, watching the children laugh. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. Family. The shock that awaited weeks later, a traveler from the colony visited his farm. The man paused at the edge of the field, squinting into the distance. "Strange," he muttered. "Your land looks brighter than the rest, as if it carries a different life." The farmer's stomach tightened. He forced a smile and handed the traveler a bag of corn. "Maybe I'm just lucky with soil," he said, but deep down he knew the truth. His farm was different because it was no longer just his. It belonged to both him and the hidden people who had chosen him as their guardian. The final reflection. That night, as the farmer sat outside his home with the crystal glowing in his hand, he thought of how far things had come, a lonely man, a quiet farm, strange signs in the soil, hungry eyes in the dark, and now, a hidden village alive with hope, a friendship forged from harvest and a bond stronger than fear. He looked up at the stars. Perhaps one day the world would learn the truth. Perhaps one day humans and these tiny exiles would meet openly, without fear of war or greed. But until that day, the secret was his to keep. The farmer closed his eyes, the hum of the crystal steady in his palm, and he thought, all it took was sharing food. All it took was one harvest. And everything changed.